Hey, hello everyone. Let me hide the comments. Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to another community stand up. We are going to talk about .NET, AI, MCP. And yes, I need to introduce myself. Or we forget about that. I'm Bruno, part of the Cloud Advocate teams doing .NET and AI. I'm super happy today with Stephen and Mike because we are going to see a lot of cool things. I mean, that's what they told me, and I know that we have I'm literally. Someone mentioned here that they have a new, fresh no, not this one. New fresh install Visual Studio Preview. I literally just installed one of the templates to do NCP. So yes, we are going to try to talk and learn today. So, but before we start, Mike, Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, happy to do that. And Bruno, thanks for having us on. I'm Mike Kistler. I'm a PM in the ASP.NET Core team, but also PM for the MCP C SDK.
And
Cool.
I am, oh, hi, yeah, and I am Stefan Halter, and I am an engineer who works closely with Mike on both of those projects. So it's been a core and MCP C SDK now.
Yes, and we were talking about how hot is before we started. How hot is MCP today? It's literally everywhere. It's literally solving also a lot of things. I was doing some Hugging. I was testing around the Hugging Face MCP server. It's super cool and more. Hey, but before we start, we have something that I want to share with everyone, and this is going to be super fast. By the way, we are going to see this a little later, but remember that a lot of when we talk about .NET, Aspire, and deployment for everything AI related, a lot of people ask literally, "Hey, can we deploy with .NET and Aspire to something else that is not container apps?" So, okay, in the eShopLite, in the eShop little scenarios that we have a new scenario which basically deploy the e-commerce application, semantic search, AI Foundry models to yes to front end and back end. Uh, but sorry, back end first and front end later as a app service. And this is up and ready, ACD app, and you have everything there. So if someone wants to start to play with this, there it is. Keep in mind that this is in preview. It was announced on build. There are a couple of things that they are tricky to make it work. So, in example, I didn't add app insights here because it's kind of tricky. You need to do a lot of once you deploy, you need to do a couple of things later, and doesn't make sense. But we are here. This is the path. If someone wants to really use app service for the .NET projects, this is also part of .NET Aspire, and hey, this is our go-to eShop AI demo now with app service. So that's it. I also see that a lot of people are joining from Miami, from Pakistan, from thanks everyone for being here. And I am going to basically pass to Mike, yes, so we can start to talk about what is NCP, what are we doing, how cool is the C Sharp SDK that we have,
Yep.
and more.
Yeah, it's very cool. Very cool. So yeah, so if you could bring up my screen, Bruno, I'll just start by talking about the new version of the spec that was released last month. It's the 2025 0618 version of the spec. You can see the previous one was 0326. So they're on about a 3 month cadence. They're expecting maybe another one in September. So the spec is moving very fast. We're trying to track it as best we can with the C Sharp SDK, and I think we're actually staying up with it pretty well. Um, we actually had most of the support for the 0618 release out within a week of the actual spec release because we had been tracking it all along, tracking the drafts. So now we're finally out here getting to talk about it. Some of the key changes you'll see here in the model context protocol docs is they removed support for JSON RPC. They added support for structured tool output. I'm going to show
To,
you a little bit
to
about
be clear, batching is what they removed the support for.
JSON. I'm sorry, JSON RPC batching. Yes. JSON RPC batching. Um, there was a big change to the way authentication is done, where they've separated the concept of the authentication server from the resource server. This was a very important change, and Stefan's going to show you that shortly. There are support for elicitation. Elicitation is a way for an MCP tool to ask for additional input from a user. And I'll show you that in a minute. There's the support for resource links, which allow a tool to return a link to a resource. Resources are another one of the abstractions in MCP alongside tools and prompts that a server can provide to clients and users. So these are all important things. There's a number of other changes as well. You can read about those in the changelog. I want to quickly point you to the C# SDK. That's in also the Model Context Protocol GitHub org, where all of the SDKs live. The C# SDK is there. And it's also available on NuGet. You can see here, you can go to the NuGet feed and pick up the package from there. What I'm going to show you is a bunch of demos, and the demos are in my little What's New repo here. And Bruno, I'm going to drop you a link to that right in the chat. So maybe you can post that to folks.
And just to be clear, in case people don't know, and also correct me if I am wrong, the MCP, what you mentioned about the standards, the protocol specification, and more, this is not a Microsoft team defining this. This is a global whatever alliance. And what we are doing is we are collaborating, we have our voice, our votes, we have suggestions and more, but then we bring the latest specification changes in version 1, 2, 3, or whatever, and apply them to the C# SDK. This is kind of like this, yes?
That is accurate. That is accurate. The MCP spec is right now sort of fathered by Anthropic, the company that produces Claude and other products like that. But they've invited other teams of other companies to come and participate in the evolution of the spec and also building out of the infrastructure. Anthropic builds the TypeScript SDK. But then there are other companies that build the Python SDK and the Go SDK and the Java SDK. And so it is a collaboration here, a cross-company collaboration to build the MCP ecosystem.
Thanks. It's just a clarification so people know that this is open source and this is not something that we lead or Anthropic lead. It's a global effort to do that. So, hey, but yes, let's go for it.
All right. So the first thing that I want to show you is elicitation. As I said, elicitation is a way for a server tool to ask for additional input from a user. Now, there's pieces on the server and also pieces on the client that are needed in order to make all this work. I'll start by showing you the server pieces. So here we have a tool. I just wrote this tool as sort of a demonstration of how you would do elicitation. I call the tool Guess the Number, and what it does is it plays a little game with the user where the user has to guess a number between 1 and 10, and it will come back and say, no, you're too low, no, you're too high, until you finally get the guess. The way elicitation works is the server can ask for pieces, input that is of a primary data type. So either a Boolean or a string or a number. You can't ask for complex bits of data, sort of structured data. And the reason for that is because this is intended for clients that are in like a web application and are going to display a form where the user would fill in these fields and things like that. Now you can ask for multiple pieces of input in the same request. So it's not structured input, but it's multiple pieces of input all at one time. So the capability is really quite powerful, and I think will fit the needs of most users. Okay, so what does that look like? So here in my tool, I start off by defining the schema for the piece of information that I'm going to ask for from the user. I give it a name. It's the answer, because we can have multiple things. We name them. And we say what the schema is for the piece of input that I want. Here it's a Boolean schema. And I'm just going to ask, do you want to play the game? And then that gets sent to the client with a method called elicit async. and that will send that request down to the client. The client will receive it, get the user's input, and send it back. When it sends it back, there's an action in the response, and that action will tell the server, did the user actually provide that input? That would be the accept action. Did the user decline to give input, or did the user just cancel out of it altogether? Okay. In order to proceed in the work of the tool, we would want the action to be accept. So we check for that, and then we check the value and determine if we're going to proceed. And then we go on here. I actually did both a Boolean and then a string and then a number, just to illustrate all three of these different types of data that you could get back. But they all follow the same pattern in that the server makes an illicit async call and specifies the schema. I wanted to show you one other thing here. When you pass the schema, it's not just the type, but you can also specify constraints that the client might use in order to determine how to get this and how to validate it and things like that, right? So all these things are things you can do with here. I used minimum and maximum on the number that I'm getting back. Now, what does the client support look like? The client, first of all, has to declare in its capabilities that it supports elicitation. And the way that it does that is when it actually connects to the server, it specifies options that will that contain an elicitation capability. And in that elicitation capability is a handler for elicitation requests. So that handler is down here, and it's going to receive an elicitation request and return an elicit result. And of course, it's async because it's going to have to go out to the user and request this input. The client that I've written here is just a simple console application, so it's just going to use read line in order to get the information. But as I said before, this could be a more elaborate client and host where it was presenting a web page or something like that for the user to input information into. So the handler needs to look at the schema and decide how it's going to accept that input and how it's going to serialize it into the response. So you can see that I have this nested if block here for if this is a Boolean schema, I do one thing. And for Booleans, you would enter true or false, but the user might also enter yes or no. And so I've added some special logic to handle that. Or a number, you would do a try parse on a double for a number. And for a string, you would just pass back the serialized string. An important thing here is you have to set that action when you send the elicit response to accept. Because if you don't set that, the default value is reject. And the default value is reject so that you can do things like this, just return a new elicit result when something went wrong to say that, the request has been rejected. Okay, so that's what the code looks like. Let me show you actually it working. So we'll get the server running, open a new terminal window here. Let's go back, make sure server's running. So it makes the request to the guess a number tool, and it says, do you want to play the game? So I'll say, yes, I want to play the game. Then it asks for my name, so give it my name, and then guess a number between 1 and 10. And all these are interactions that are going back and forth. You can see that this is a multi-turn thing between the server and the client. So I'll guess 5, and that's too low, so I'll guess 7. And that's too low, and I'll guess 9, and that's too high, so I'll guess 8. There we go. I got it in 4 attempts. I got it in 2 earlier today. So anyway, so that's elicitation, a great way for your tool to get additional input from the user when it needs it. The next feature I'll show is structured output.
Before we go there, let me go back quickly to a couple of questions that we have here. And hey, let me go this one directly to. So Andy was asking about that if we can benefit of an MCP server with C# without using GitHub, Copilot, or VS Code and more. And the answer is yes. This is literally the C# SDK. You can create and expose some functionalities if you want to do a server role, or if you want to include some whatever in your applications, you can use the client and connect to MCP servers, use the tools and more. So this is the idea of what we have today.
And obviously, we're going to recommend Copilot in VS Code because we're from Microsoft. I like it. I use it a lot. But there are tons of other, agentic tools, right? Like you might have heard of Claude Code that supports MCP servers. Gemini CLI. I think Kiro from Amazon. Like pretty much all of these newer agentic LLM-based hosts, as we sometimes call them, or clients, support MCP servers.
Yep.
Yes, because they are great kind of abstracting those kind of things. So, an example, we are using a lot an MCP server for ADO because we use Azure DevOps a lot. Right now, what I am doing, I have a couple of scripts that literally say, go to this YouTube video, take a look at the views, and update this ADO item. And that's it. And the MCPs and the prompt in the back, we figure out if we have servers that I can open a YouTube video and take a look at the views, and then if I can open the... You can do that directly from Visual Studio Code with Copilot. But you can even program that if you want in a console application because we have the SDK. So that's kind of the idea.
And another interesting thing, so Mike just showed the new elicitation feature, which is cool. And which is like super cool, right? Like it's interactive. So like, yeah, last time I was doing a YouTube video with Mike, someone's like, well, why not just use an open API spec, right? And this is a reason why, right? Like you don't get this kind of functionality. The protocol is like purpose built for working with AI agents. If you want to do some of your own homework, I think sampling is another kind of similar feature where instead of talking to the human directly, you're asking the LLM questions. So yeah.
Yes, and one more, which is kind of it's kind of a bigger one, that MCP is more effective than RAG.
I don't think you can compare them that way. Actually. Yes, I think actually. RAG is all about finding the right data to put into the context window so that the LLM can give you a high quality response. MCP is actually very similar to RAG in the sense that we're taking tools, not data, but tools, actually active things, and putting them in the context window for the LLM to use. So these are two kind of orthogonal things.
I think we are allowing almost the LLM to become more involved in the RAG, right? Like to basically request how to augment the context window. But yeah, it's kind of philosophical. But yeah.
I know that we can get here. And yes, there are views that you can ask this question and more, but it's not like that. Sorry, I didn't want to miss this also because Jose is super active with us. He gives a lot of support and I have this. So, cool. Hey. You got me with the elicitation, by the way. I love it.
Good. Okay, well, so now I'm going to go on and show you a new thing, which is structured output. The idea of structured output is up until this version of the spec, a tool would return its response and it would just be text. It would just be a string, right? And that was okay, but it meant that the LLM would have to figure out what was in that text. It would have to parse that text. It would have to guess at what the structure was that was within that text. There could be something like serialized JSON in that text string, but the LLM would have to divine that by looking at it, inspecting it, things like that. With structured output, the idea is the tool can declare what the structure of the output actually is, right? So the LLM knows, I'm going to get this field and this field and this field, or I'm going to get an array of things or stuff like that. And it makes it much more efficient for the LLM to go in and use that data once it gets it back. So there's a capability called structured output. And the way that you use that in C#, it's actually very simple. you, I need to go to tools and pick my product tool here. All you do is you add this into the attribute for MCP server tool to say that your tool is going to return structured output. Okay, you just turn that on, and that's it. Now, what that will do is that will make the C# SDK return the schema for the response of your method. Here it's list products. Okay, it will return that schema when as the result of a list tools thing, and that will go to the LLM, so the LLM will know, oh, this is what the tool is actually going to produce. And one other thing is, when the tool is called and gives its result, the C# SDK will take the result and serialize it and put it in that text string like it always has, but also take the structured result and put it in a separate field of the result called structured output. So let me show you that real quick. Get this server running. All right, now what I've got here is actually a polyglot notebook, and it turns out that this is going to show the result in a little bit nicer way than we might not than we would have gotten from a REST client, because the REST client is going to return a JSON RPC response that's all jammed together. So let me just run this. This is going to do the tools list, okay? And we'll see the response from the tools list here. And you can see that in that list of tools, there's a get products tool. Okay, it has an input schema, which it always had, but now it has an output schema as well. Let me open this up a little bit more. So now we have the output schema that has the products in an array. So there's an array of products, and each product has a product ID, a name, a description, on and on and on. Okay, so all this information can now be fed to the LLM, and the LLM will know how to parse that, right? And then when you see this in the tool call, so we'll make a tool call to actually do the get products call. And now you see we get the content coming back, and here's the text. Here's that text string, which is really just serialized JSON. But I mean, look at that. That's kind of ugly and whatever. Whereas here's the structured content, and the structured content is this nice JSON result that would be very easy for an LLM to parse. Okay, so that's structured output. Any questions on that one?
Not about this. I mean, it's super cool. The chat is on fire about how we can use semantic kernel with this on that. I'm trying to keep up there. Okay. But anyway, this one is going to be easier to talk about this. Someone is asking if we use the MCP server with the LLM, if we are going to use for training purpose. The answer is no, we don't train. Your data is your data. That's it. You can even do MCP and all of these LLM scenarios using local models if you want with Olama. So you are going to work here and there, but usually, and 100% of the cases, in example, in Azure AI Foundry, your data is not going to be used to train the models and more. So that's the long question, the short question.
At least for the SDK, right? Like if you're plugging into a cloud LLM, like, read your agreements, right? But for the SDK, it's open source. You can see the code. We don't have telemetry that phones home. At most, we're tracking things like NuGet downloads. Yeah.
Yes, and this is not related, but this is also a good one, and it also was part of the AI Foundry Discord server that we had the other day. Is in the MCP world, do we have any guidance? And this is also a question, Bruno's question, about how do we handle exceptions? Which is the best? And I've been doing web dev for a long time, so I have my own answer here. But is there something there around exceptions?
Stefan?
I believe so at the lower level. So first of all, I do know by default, if you throw an exception, we hide like we give you kind of a generic error message,
Yes.
as far as I recall. And this is mostly a security thing. Like we don't want to show like the structure of your source code by like spitting a stack trace back to the LLM or to the client, unless that's something you wanted. It's similar in an ASP.NET Core app with the error page. Like you have to opt in to like a development mode for more detailed errors. Now, if it's kind of like an expected error, and like how to communicate to the LLM that it's like an error rather than a successful result. I know you can do that at like the lower level tool call handler level. If you're using like the attributes and stuff, I think the recommendation, we could try to, I don't have the option right in front of me right now. I think I would probably go with throwing an exception and being careful about which exceptions you throw.
Yes.
So catch any kind of unexpected exceptions, but like, before it exits your tool call, and then, normalize it. And I think, there's a MCP server option somewhere.
Yes, and it fits what we were talking the other day, which is basically everything we learn in the web dev is that you don't propagate exceptions. You give an HTTP status, you give the 400, not found, 500, internal server error or whatever, and you figure out what to do. But as you mentioned, we don't want to propagate exception. It makes sense. You don't want to expose any sensitive data. So it seems that still we don't have any kind of a specification for that, but let's apply what we learned from the web dev part here, which seems to be a good approach. I'd like to hear literally your word, Stephen, about that. Sorry about that, Mike. We are taking over.
Very good. All good stuff. All good stuff. One last thing that I'll show is the resource links. So this is a capability where an MCP server tool can return not just text, but can also return a link to a resource. Resources are, another abstraction that an MCP server can provide. And so this is a way of saying, rather than embedding all of the resource into the response, it can just provide a link to that resource. And then the client can go off and read that resource, or it can provide it to the LLM that would ask to read that resource or whatever. And these can actually be resources that are dynamically created as a result of the tool call. Okay, so you can create a resource as a result of the tool call and return its link, and then the client can start querying it. So that's what I'm going to show you here is we've got our resource tools. This is a very, very simple tool, right? It's just make a resource. And I've got a method that will generate a resource given an ID. We just create an ID here, and then we create the tool result and put the resource URI into it, okay, and return that back. And what the client will get back is just that resource URI that it could then go and get. So let me get this started. / resource links. All right, and we've got my little HTTP file here. So we're going to call the make a resource tool here. And you'll see that what we get back is a content that has type resource link and has a URI in it. And like I said, it picked a random number for that resource. So it picked 32. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to put 32 here. And now I'm going to do a resource read on that resource that I just created. And you'll see that we can actually get that resource back. In this case, we randomly created a binary resource. So it returned an application octet stream resource type. So that's resource links and tool results. Very simple, but I think very powerful feature for servers to be able to utilize.
Tons of scenarios interact with data, with knowledge and more, and provide the grounded, the source of the knowledge, the resource and more. It's always a good practice. So I love to have this. Somehow I've never seen that we missed this. I didn't realize that we didn't have this. This is super cool.
Yeah. All right, so now I want to turn it over to Stefan and let him show the new authentication stuff that has been added.
All right.
Perfect. Let
Tell
me
me,
know, Stefan, when you want me to share your screen. There it is.
you can share it. Yeah. So I was kind of put on spot with the last question about how to return an error with like a message. So I brought up the code. To be very clear, the MCP C# SDK is built in layers. So we have kind of the lower level APIs. So this is a MCP server tool, right? Like, and it implements invoke async. You can implement this yourself if you really want to get low level. And the protocol does define this is error property. Now, not everyone wants to write a derived class from MCP server tool. Most people want to use the attributes, right? Like Mike was showing with the MCP tool type and stuff. And in that case, if you throw an MCP exception, we'll include the message in the error, and we'll set error to true. If it's not an MCP exception, we'll hide the message for the security reasons we talked about. So that's the opt-in.
This is so cool, and I just put this. That's why I love to have you here. You are the expert. You know your stuff, and you are ready to, hey, how do we handle exception?
Right.
2 seconds. This is how we handle exception.
Right. Yeah. A little tough off the top of my head, honestly. I wish I had the answer faster. But yes. All right. So for the main purpose of this section of the talk is I wanted to talk about the new OAuth features that were added into the June 18th protocol. So this is one of the major new features. There was an authorization specification in the March protocol, but it required you to either implement or proxy an OAuth server with your MCP server. And this is in this new design, which is very different from the old one, is intended to be easier for MCP server authors. So you can basically offload a lot of responsibility to OAuth server like Entra in this case. Now, because this is a little unique with regards to like OAuth authentication. Typically with OAuth authentication, you either are authenticating a browser or you're authenticating a client that you wrote historically, or that you have some amount of control over if you're doing like a native client or a mobile client. But with MCP servers, they're not communicating with browsers directly, and they're not necessarily clients you control. So it's actually required some new OAuth, not new OAuth features, but previously not widely supported OAuth features to make this work. So we can talk about how this works. So for those of you who are not super familiar with OAuth, it's like what you use typically for single sign-on these days. So that's when you get like redirected to Microsoft or Google or Facebook, and then you get redirected back and you're logged in, right, without having to create a password for a new website or whatever. So this is that, but for MCP clients and servers. So in this case, since we don't just want to reply with like a redirect like we would in a browser to an MCP client, tell me if you have trouble seeing this. This is like the kind of the mermaid diagram from the specification. So I'm going to kind of...
Fine. I even have issues with my eyesight in my monitor, so no problem there.
Right. So yeah, so basically kind of the new parts that aren't typical in most applications protected by OAuth today, though it does exist, is this www authenticate header. When you get a 401, right? So say you're not logged in, a 401 unauthorized response typically means that like we want credentials, but you didn't provide us any. And then we return metadata via this like well-known GET endpoint on the MCP server, which says, hey, should I connect with Entra or Google or Facebook or what have you, right? The other interesting part is dynamic client registration, which is recommended for any OAuth server that's going to be doing MCP authentication. If you don't have dynamic client registration, what that means is that the client the MCP client or host connecting to the OAuth server needs to already have a client ID. So there needs to be some prior knowledge there. But the goal of the specification is not to require any prior knowledge, is to let basically any client connect to any server. So that's what the dynamic client registration allows you to do, is basically, without having a predetermined client ID up front, we'll just create one. It will give me a client secret. And then from this point, this is what would be considered the conventional OAuth authorization code flow, which is with PKCE, which is considered kind of the most secure standard flow these days. There's other kinds of flows like implicit flow or like client credential flow, where you just like send your password directly to the server, but we only support authorization code flow. So once you basically do this whole dance, you get an access token. And from there on out, you just use that access token as part of the authorization header. So you have like authorization : bear access token, if you've ever seen that. And that's basically how you authenticate with MCP. This is still a very early spec. There are things that we're still designing. For example, like what if certain tools need more privileges than other tools? How do you upgrade to get more scopes or something like that? That's sometimes called incremental consent. Those things are not yet implemented, but this is like a good start, right? To have basically, if you want to have Claude Code or VS Code or Gemini CLI or any of these clients authenticate with your server, this is how you can do that without, trying to get Microsoft or Google or Facebook to basically hard code information about your MCP server, which might be hard to do. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how this sets up. So we have both client and server support. First, I'll just talk about the client configuration. So this is, one thing, maybe it's taking a few steps back, is the auth specification for MCP is only for the streamable HTTP transport. If you're doing standard IO, which is pretty common for MCP, then you're not doing OAuth. You're basically, at that point, you have an executable running on the user's machine. So the idea is you can kind of control the auth flow that way. But for HTTP scenarios, this allows you to run a remote MCP server, which is, of course, super useful. And without running any code on the client machine, it still allows you to log in, which is nice. So the main things that you need to configure is, notice that you don't need to configure a client ID because the sample is using dynamic client registration. But what you do need to configure is a redirect URI, which is used to handle this, after I've signed in to Entra, and then it typically would, redirect back if you were doing like an ASP.NET Core website auth, right? It would just redirect back to your website. But in this case, we're going to redirect to a localhost URL, which is then handled in the sample via HTTP listener. And this just allows us to return the authorization code that we receive from the query string. If you don't override this handler, and I'll show you this later, what will happen is you'll see the URL that this was handling. So instead of setting up HTTP listener to handle the URL back, it will just tell you via console write line what your authorization code is to like kind of copy paste it. All right, so for the server side, we're using JotBear. So this is what you would typically use for a web API or like a REST API with an open API spec to protect it using access tokens, which are retrieved from an OAuth server. So we're able to reuse an existing authentication handler, as we call it in ASP.NET Core, for the most part. to authenticate our MCP requests. So in this case, I'm testing this with an in-memory OAuth server that supports dynamic client registration and also supports resource indicators, which are two features either requested or mandated by the MCP spec that we're working very hard to support in Entra, but is currently not widely supported. We've also gotten, in the MCP steering committee Discord, people are talking about, we have representatives from a lot of companies like Okta, Google, so forth. So everyone's kind of on board with supporting dynamic client registration and resource indicators like this in-memory OAuth server does, which we use for testing. So it doesn't all work quite yet, particularly the dynamic client registration with Entra, but it will soon. And this is a stand-up, so it's just showing you how it works. So the interesting part on the server side, other than adding add.bearer, is we have the second authentication handler. We're running two authentication handlers that sets up this resource metadata endpoint. So on this diagram, this basically is how you're configuring this GET request. So it points to the right OAuth server. So if I can zoom out, thank you. That's what we point to, right? So we have the authorization servers are in memory server URL, and then we point out that we're specifically protecting this MCP resource. That's just to make sure that no one tries to use this token for some other MCP server. And that is most of it, right? So ASP.NET Core has this concept of a challenge scheme and an authenticate scheme. So what's happening is when you're unauthorized or when you haven't provided an access token, the 401 is handled by this MCP specific authentication handler, which then returns a www authenticate header, which you see here, which points to the well-known resource endpoint. And then it also handles that well-known resource endpoint and points to the authorization server. From that point, the client takes it all the way with no further server interaction or no further MCP server interaction to get the access token. And once you get the access token, it's completely validated using the normal add.bearer validator, which is the default authenticate scheme. So that's a lot of talking. Without further ado, we can just show the demo. So I've configured Visual Studio when I start this project to start both this MCP server and that in-memory OAuth server. And if we then run the protected MCP client app, which is right here, we can call .NET run. And really quickly, just to kind of give you an idea of what it will do code-wise, is it just iterates over the two tools that we specify in the weather tools, which we use in some of our other samples too, to get the alerts and forecasts from, I think, the National Weather Service. And the client will just iterate over it, see if it can find the get alerts tool. And if it does, it will give us the alerts for the state of Washington, which I just checked a few minutes ago, and there was one. If there isn't, this is going to be kind of like less interesting output, but whatever.
And by the way, these are the samples that are part of the SDK repo. Yes, these are the main samples.
Exactly. Right. Yes. But they don't use any internal code or anything. But yes, for my convenience, and since this is a stand-up, I'm just running it straight out of our repo. But you can copy paste it into your own solution and just reference the NuGet packages, and everything should work the same. So this right here, you'll notice, is actually that HTTP listener endpoint. So that code that I showed you earlier that started up HTTP listener on that callback path is writing that authentication complete. So at this point, it's gotten this code. That's what it was listening for. And once it gets that code, it's able to, in the background, exchange that for an access code, which hopefully allowed it to get alerts, right? So that is the alert and it's a red flag warning of some sort. If someone who knows more about weather might be able to tell me what that is, if there's an emergency, call 911. All right, so there's your alerts. Some interesting things to note about how how to kind of do more cool things once you do have off, is you can read the user via HTTP context accessor. So when you define tools using these attributes, you can inject any services that are in your service provider. So in the other samples, you usually have like an HTTP client factory. But with HTTP context accessor, you can always access the ongoing HTTP context or for the current request that's invoking the tool. That's a bug that I fixed kind of recently. It used to work in most scenarios. Now it works in all scenarios. And if it doesn't work, please file an issue in the repo. But what you can do is inside your tool call, you can call HTTP context user, and for instance, you can write out the username, which I automatically generated in my test OAuth server. So here we're just creating a JOT token. You notice there's like no login step just because so we have this username that we create there, and rather than rerun it again, since I already ran the sample, you can see it's like written out. So you have access to my dynamically generated GUID-based username. But you can have any other interesting claims too. One thing that I would like, and I know a lot of other people would like, is if you could do kind of like an authorize attribute on the tool, kind of like you would in ASP.NET Core. For technical reasons, it's not the simplest thing, right? You don't want it to imply that it does anything in standard IO, right? Like if you registered these weather tools in standard IO, this wouldn't do anything. And right now it doesn't do anything in the web either. But nonetheless, you do have kind of this low-level control, right? Like we were talking about having high-level APIs and low-level APIs earlier in the context of like writing a derived MCP tool class. In the case of this, I have a sample of how, based on the user, you can dynamically change the list of tools. So really quick, I'm not going to write it. I will expand it, right? We do have this kind of advanced feature with HTTP transport, which does allow you to read the HTTP context at the beginning of the session before we even list out the tools in the list tools call and so forth. So for instance, if I were to change my test OAuth server to show alerts only, right? Like in the last call, it listed out both tools, right? We had get forecasts and get alerts. But now if I update this MCP or this OAuth test server, so like when it generates my user to give me an alerts only claim, and I restart it, this code that I had on the MCP server will, whoops, sorry about that. Inception. So this code will get run at the beginning of the session and then limit things to just that tool. So if we run the client again, eventually it will authenticate. After it authenticates with that browser redirect that you saw pop up, we'll have that user, which is that dynamic user again. This time it should have that weather only thing, right? So if we keep on going, we're now just updating the tool collection to be only get alerts, no get forecasts. Another interesting thing to note about this tools collection is it's thread safe, and you can modify it mid-session. And if you do, we'll even send a tool change notification to the client. So it's pretty powerful. You can change the list of tools that are available, and you can change it based on the user. It's just not as easy yet as adding an attribute to your tool. But the capability is there, and we're looking at how to provide kind of a higher level APIs. So if we continue this, we'll see that this time when it lists out the tools, instead of listing both the alerts and the forecast tool, right, it only found the one tool. So yeah, any questions?
We don't have questions about this. I mean, I like it in terms of no problems. In terms of we need that, and I didn't even knew the changes from the previous one to this one, so it's kind of nice. And no, the chat was on fire because we have Pocket Pixie and kernel and more talking about. I didn't even know that we have an OS written in C#, which is called Microsoft Singularity. So news for me.
Yeah.
Auth should be there, but people don't like to deal with authorization and more. But hey, this is super, super cool. And we only have 5 more minutes or so. So let me bring this one very quickly because I really like it. If someone wants to start from scratch, and this is when we started, I mentioned that I did it like this. We have this template. I think we are in version 9, 7, 1, preview, 3, 2, 5, whatever the latest version. But it's super cool because once you install this, you have these 2 new templates in your Visual Studio where you have a C# console to do a server, and you also have the AI chat here. So if I am correct and I am open Visual Studio and go for a new project, let me move my... we don't do CUDA here, not today, but we have here a console application. Let's create, this is the second one. You know I'm cheating. You can see here MCP Server 2. I created one 5 minutes ago, so let's create a new one. And of course, it's going to be in the other monitor. But this is what we have, which is kind of nice. Let me open, we have a README and AVC of MCP. Yes, we have a server where we have some login. We have the MCP server and a specific tool with local for one. We are not going to do server, and we have and we have here a sample number tools. Hey, this is cool. Literally 2 clicks and we have a up and running server here for this. I like it. I'm not going to create the other one. That's one is a bigger one, but let me share the link here in the chat if someone wants to try this. And I see that someone was asking about this. What version is available? I don't know. This one, the one that we just shared in the chat. Don't make me say numbers. You know, English is not my language. Numbers and spelling is hard for me. People are laughing. But if you go to this long URL, which is also going to be part of the video resources, you can install this one. And we keep updating this. Yes, Mike, Stephen? I know that we keep adding things here and there for this.
Oh, yeah.
Especially recently.
Is this the version of the template that actually uses the new DNX capability, or is that someplace else?
Someone was asking about DNX. Can you explain DNX for 5 years old?
I'll try. I haven't really been tracking this, but my understanding is, right now, a lot of MCP servers, when they run locally, are started with NPX, the NPM capability to just install and run something all in one go, right? You point at a package that's out on NPM and you say NPX, and it will download it and run it. And the idea of DNX is essentially the same thing. It's like you don't even need to do a separate .NET tool install first before you do a run. You just point to the NuGet package and say DNX, and it will pull it down and run it. So,
and correct me if I am wrong. That's going to come on .NET 10. It's not.
That's coming in .NET 10. It's already in preview 6. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I think I read about that somewhere here and there, but just double checking that people, if you want to try this, you need to install the latest preview. And I know it's there, and I got the same idea. Thanks for explaining that. But just in case, this is .NET 10, where we are going to have also .NET Run, app CS file, and a lot of new cool things. But just checking.
Indeed. Yep.
And Seig is saying that, yes, that's how it was intended to work. So NCP tooling will be easier to use.
Yep.
It will be nice to see how DNX evolves with all of this, with Stephen just mentioned, because at some moment, some of these tools, servers, and more will require some kind of authentication. So that's going to be a nice, tricky flow to have there. Lucky us, it seems that we are evolving before getting there. So it's going to be a cool one.
And one thing I just wanted to mention before we run out of time is that you can use certificate off, Kerberos, whatever. It's if you control the client, don't feel limited to using those OAuth features I just showed. What it matters for is when you want it to work with any MCP client, and then that's when you really want it to do the OAuth stuff.
Yep.
Perfect. And hey, I think we are at the end of time. I think we cover all of the questions. Oh, we have one more question from the beginning. Let me see if we have. I need an MCP server to track this, so you can help me. What we were talking 20 minutes ago. MCP best used in use cases where someone has a complex system and they want to give a knowledge to an AI.
Not really. Not really. I mean, as we discussed earlier, the idea of MCP is that you can give it access to tools, right? Yes. And then the LLM can ask for things. Now, it's not just tools. There's also prompts and resources. So it's broader than just tools. But it started with tools, and I think that's probably still the most powerful use case.
Yeah, I would say it could be useful if you give the AI a way to narrow the context, right? You got to give it tools that allow it to read the part that it's interested in.
Yep.
Yes, and we are seeing the same in agents right now, where people are starting to talk about the concept of micro agents, because you can't do an agent that do everything. You prefer to have small agents. We have some small maybe tools here and there to do very specific things, and then have another agents that can orchestrate this and that. So, hey, everything is changing. Everything is changing fast, and it's super cool. And yes, Janice could hear agent. Yes, we haven't said agents today, so we didn't have the bingo. I think it's the first time we mentioned agent at the end.
I think I said it a few times.
You probably said, yes, you mentioned agent. If we don't say MCP or agent or LLM, this is not an AI.
Are we even doing my job at this point? Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Hey, one more time. Thank you, Stephen. Thank Mike for being here. Thanks everyone who are also joining. Again, check the resources in the descriptions. And thanks everyone. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Thanks, Bruno. So long, everyone.
Thank you. See ya.